to another book review by Alice. I'm your host, Alice Hanna. Hi. Today we are going to be talking about The Priory of the Orange Tree. I'm not going to pick this one up because it is a monstrosity. It is so big it did not even fit in my little book stand that I use to hold up my books while I'm doing these reviews. So Priory of the Orange Tree is written by Samantha Shannon. It is an adult fantasy novel and the author is based in the UK. And I read it specifically because my editor recommended it to me. There were a handful of books she wanted me to read when I was working on my book series, and Priory of the Orange Tree was one of them. I also read Updraft, which was recommended by her, and a couple of different writing books, all of which were pretty helpful to me. But this one, I have to say, I read it because Sam told me to. I don't know why. Yes, it has kingdoms. Yes, it has intrigue. Yes, it has political things happening in that. But I don't see, like, with the main characters. And yeah, there are strong female leads and relationships in here, which I think was the reason she wanted me to read it. But I always refer to it when I tell people about it. It's the lesbian dragons book. There are no lesbians in my book. And I just felt like that was such a massive arc in the story that I felt like, how is that comparable to mine? But I mean, maybe in the romance in general, but I don't know. It felt more like it compared to my old version of my book, my first draft, not the one I ended up with, but that's okay. So it did take me quite a while to get through this book because of the sheer size of it. I've taken longer with shorter books, but I was every day chipping away at this book, and it still took me 6 weeks because everything I read, I had to read in complete silence and really focus, because mostly when I read YA, I can literally read a book while I'm in the kitchen making dinner and my kids are yelling in the background. I couldn't do that with this. I had to sit down, quiet, focus. So in order to do my review, I did this the simplest way possible because it's gargantuan. I made a pro and a con list. So on the con side, it's massive. 804 pages. It's huge. It's like 240,000 words. It is gigantic. There are a ton of characters. Thank you, Shannon Samantha, or Samantha Shannon, however it goes. Thank you for the 20 pages of character breakdowns in the back of the book, where she gives you every character's name, what kingdom they're from, what their job was, and that. Without it, I would have been lost, and I am able to keep character names in my head. So this book was just so many characters. It was hard at the beginning. I'd say I really didn't care about anybody until at least 300 pages in, and it didn't actually get interesting or exciting for me until at least page 500, which is not normal for me. Like, that's hard. When you're reading a book this big and you don't care about anybody for the first half, that's rough. So it was rough to get through. There were a couple elements of the story which I feel like weren't woven in as nicely. They kind of came out of nowhere for me. And I mean, there were a lot of point of views in here, which is great to get all the sides of the story. And when you have multiple kingdoms like this, you kind of need to have a point of view in that story. But the problem was they were so similar that I couldn't tell who was who, and that was a little bit frustrating at times. And while it was kind of an adventure in the story, there was so much religious and political undertones and aspects to it that it was really frustrating, because as somebody who doesn't like to read books where political and religious issues are the main focus of the storyline, that got a little bit boring for me, just because it's not something I would typically read. And when I'm finding it in a fantasy book that is already dense and has a lot to it, to have that extra element that is not my cup of tea was a little bit of a struggle for me. What I did like is the characters, and there were really fantastic. They were deep. They had really good backgrounds in them. I felt like I really got to know them throughout the book, and the ones that I eventually, after halfway mark liked, I felt like they were incredibly well developed, and they had backstories and things like that. I also liked that after having read as much YA fantasy as I have recently, it was nice to really have one where I had to sit and think and mull things over without just simply reading and rushing through it like I have the tendency to do with the YA books, because I can. I don't need to read them slow, so I don't. And I mean, the story arc overall, if I can ignore the major over the head beating of the political and religious connotations of it, the story was a lot of fun. There were 3 kingdoms and they were all fighting with each other and all going after each other and that, and then they all come together in order to go after this one powerful evil that everyone forgets about, and suddenly it's like, oh crap, we should fix that. So that was kind of fun. It made me think a lot of like The Hobbit, in the sense where like you had the dwarves and the elves and the wizards and the humans all come together with the hobbits to bring the ring to Mordor, and everybody was kind of coming together to defeat it. It was like that, in that the east and the west and the south all had to come together to defeat the one bad guy. And I mean, there are dragons, and who doesn't love dragons? Dragons are always fun. If you put dragons in a book, it makes it better. So if you're looking for, oh, the other good part about it is the book is written in parts. So I think there's 5 or 6 parts in it, which means if you are trying to tackle this book or you're afraid of tackling this book because of the sheer size of it, you can read 1 or 2 parts and then pause, read something else, and come back to it. So it's not as if you have to read it in one big slew. The author did a really good job breaking it up into parts, so that was really nice. I will say it hurt to hold this book simply because of how big it is. Let's see if I can turn it without knocking everything over. It, like, holding this book made my wrist hurt. And I have to be honest, when I started reading it, it was like this. I had to read with my knees up, or like on the couch where I could lean it against the couch, or just on a table, because I could not hold this. So this is one of those books I would strongly recommend buying the ebook, because it hurt my wrist to hold this book for that long. So, yeah, just saying. But if you're looking for a book that does have in-depth world building and is different, and if you like political intrigue or religious type aspects in your read, this is fantastic for that. Like, go for it. Also, lesbian, so it's Pride Month, and, you know, who doesn't love a good lesbian read? Like, there you go. Have a Pride book with crazy fantasy and all sorts of massive world building in that. But, I mean, the author did a really good job building the world and everything, and, yeah. I gave it 4 stars because I liked it. Would I read it again? No, it's way too big. I will not read it again. But I also don't read books again, so you can't take that as really being any indication. But no, I keep it. That should tell you something. I won't read it again, but it lives on my shelf because I'm proud that I read it. So yeah, looking for YA fantasy with lesbian romance, some dragons, and political and religious intrigue where everyone comes together to fight one big baddie. Check out Priory of the Orange Tree. Have a great day and happy reading.